So I'm going to shut the door. Welcome to the first meeting of the Climate and Environment Emergency Executive Panel. The first item on the agenda, as with any meeting where the chair hasn't been elected at annual council, is the appointment of chair. May I ask if you've got any nominations for the appointment of chair, please?
Yes, thank you. Can I nominate Councillor Hampton, please?
Thank you, Councillor Stootley. And anybody to second, please? Councillor Padder, thank you. Any other nominations? In that case, may I please put this to the vote, please? Thank you. All those voting in favour, please. That is a majority, so that's by simple majority, that's voted in favour. Thank you, Councillor Hampton. Pass to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 2, appointment of a vice chair. Does anyone have any nominations? I would open by nominating Councillor Stootley. Any other nominations? Sorry? Councillor Champion.
Both need to be moved and seconded, please.
Can I have a seconder for Councillor Stootley? Yep. And for Councillor Champion? Put it to a vote. Oh. Oh no. Are you okay? Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay. Great.
Just to recap, we've had Councillor Hampton has nominated Councillor Stootley, seconded by Councillor Padder. Councillor Osborne has nominated Councillor Champion as Vice Chair, seconded by Councillor Lubbock. So, Chair, just need to vote on those, please.
All those in favour of electing Councillor Stootley as Vice Chair? That's 1, 2,
3, 4. Those voting in favour?
All those in favour of electing Councillor Champion?
That's 3 to 4.
Great.
So, Councillor Stootley.
So yeah, Councillor Stootley, well done. Item 3, apologies. Do we have any apologies sent in? I know we've got Councillor Osborne instead of Councillor Fox. Yeah. Any declarations of interest for this meeting? Nope. The minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 14th of February 2023, I think most of us were still there, weren't we? Has everyone had a chance to look at them? Yeah. Everyone happy?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. And item 6, or the first substantive item, we've got the integrated waste management strategy. Andy, am I handing over to you to introduce?
That's okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
So I just want to thank yourself, Councillor Hampton, and the panel for inviting me along this afternoon, and to provide an update on our approach and how we're going to deliver the UK Government's National Waste Strategy. And I think it's helpful to set some context.
Andy, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. Could you use your mic?
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, okay. I think it's helpful to provide some context for where we are now. I'll talk a little later about the waste strategy that came out in 2018 and the UK Government's response in the Environment Act of 2021. But I think it's important to emphasise that the good news is that I think our approach and the Government's approach are aligning in terms of our aspirations and ambitions. We all want to minimise our impact on the environment, increase recycling, reduce the amount of resource that we use to deliver services, and also I think what can be quite silent in this is to create a circular economy. So that means that we're building an economy based on recycling, reusing material, upcycling, and so on. So I think the aspirations and ambitions are aligning between local government and the UK government, but we need to recognise that there's a lot of complexity there as well, and I know there'll be frustration amongst members about the pace of progress or lack of it by the council. in implementing this, but as we'll see later on, there's an awful lot of complexity there. We have quite well-defined legal responsibilities in terms of the services that we provide, and across the country there's a patchwork of arrangements for implementing that. So, for example, we're in a two-tier situation in Norfolk. So the county council are responsible for disposing of waste. We collect it. The county council disposes of it. The good news is we don't rely on landfill anymore for disposing of our waste. So the impact of methane, which we know is a much more powerful greenhouse gas than CO2, that's been minimised, but it obviously creates its own problems. And prevention is better than cure. But across the country, we have unitary authorities, we have second-tier authorities, we have county councils, all working in partnerships, different kinds of partnerships, to deliver the same range of services, and it's causing a lot of delay and uncertainty. So I think it's really, really important to set that scene. The good news is, again, our partnerships here, we work in partnership with the county council very closely. We also work with the other district councils in Norfolk through the Norfolk Waste Partnership, and they are highly effective. We've done a lot of the groundwork, and we'll come on to that later, in terms of preparing for the implementation of our own waste strategy and the national waste strategy. So I think it's a mixed picture, if you like. There's high levels of complexity, delay and uncertainty, but where we are now as a council means that we're in a good place to address that. We're also in a good place to if you like, define our own path and how we implement the changes that are coming. There's no one size fits all. I think that's really important as well. So I think that's a good thing that the government haven't been prescriptive, although we'll come on to that. They haven't been prescriptive in terms of how we deliver services. What they are being, and we'll touch on this as well, is they're going to be more prescriptive in terms of the type of services that we deliver. So that's the context, if that's okay, and I'll crack on with the background. So can everybody see that? I should have checked that beforehand, but hopefully you've all got access to a screen. Yeah. So I mentioned earlier the Resources and Waste Strategy for England. So that was released in 2018, and it set out a number of objectives for waste management, and it also set out the councils across the UK, but obviously particularly England, the council's responsibilities and obligations in terms of delivering that strategy. And again, as I said, I think the first thing they set out was something that we can all sign up to, in that we want to collect as much recycled material as possible, and we want to maintain its quality. Now, the reason for that is a lot of what happens in the waste services and the waste industry is based on finance. It's basically a commodity market. Doing a bit of research for this, there's £11 billion spent in the public sector in the UK on waste management. It's a massive industry. Biffa, the biggest company in the UK, waste management company, is valued at £1 billion. So, as well as there being an environmental imperative around this, there's also a financial and economic one. So, a lot of the changes that the UK government are proposing are about maintaining quality of recycling, so that it's easier to recycle, so that we can process it more easily, and also to stimulate markets. It also was aimed at improving collaboration between councils. I think that's already happening, certainly at a local level, and it's happening across the country. One of the things I wanted to do as well, we report, and we'll talk about this later, we report at the moment on a recycling rate. So our recycling rate is around about 39%, and that's based on weights. So we collect about 67,000 tonnes a year, and we recycle, if my maths is right, that'll be probably about 30,000 tonnes a year, and that's just the garden waste, the blue bin material, food waste, and it's all based on weights. But what it doesn't take into account is the carbon that's captured in each of these commodities. So, for example, the most carbon intensive commodity that will be recycled is textiles, but that we collect a minimum amount of textiles. We do it through the curbside scheme. BIF will collect that as part of the collection rounds. It's a tiny, tiny proportion of what we collect, but in terms of carbon capture, it's massive. So what they want to do is to move away from this weight-based approach and try and look at the carbon that's captured in the materials that we're collecting. What they also want to do, it doesn't affect us directly, but I think it might affect us through some of the services that we provide. They want to move away from single-use plastics, basically, and ban them by 2025. And the last bit is the most relevant one for the council, and it's talking about, and it's a really wordy bullet point there, but what they want to do, there's three main proposals that affect us in the strategy and the Environment Act, which we'll talk about. And that was, the first one was about an extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging. And what that means is that any producer of packaging or retailer will be responsible for paying for the recycling and collection of that. Now, that has implications not just for the likes of Amazon and Tesco, I always use them as the two examples, or any retailer or producer of packaging. What it's saying is they'll now pay the councils to collect and recycle that material. But I think there's an implication there for consumers as well. But this won't happen. This isn't going to happen free of charge. These companies aren't going to pay into the scheme out of the goodness of their heart. There is a risk that cost will be passed on to consumers. Now, there's a big part of the waste industry, if you like, that's worked on the basis of the polluter pays for the last 30 years. You can argue, and I would argue, that it's fair that consumers pay for their consumption. But I think that there are big implications there, particularly in the current economic climate with cost of living crisis and high rates of inflation, without wanting to get too political. But as an issue, so that's the extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on. There's also a deposit return scheme for drinks containers that they're looking at, and that means that there'll be a levy, if you like, on all drinks containers under 3 litres, I think it is at the moment in England, and that levy would be returned to a consumer, a member of the public, when they take the container back to a retailer. We'll talk about that later on. So that's the second part of the National Waste Strategy. And then the third part, which I talked about in my introduction, was this consistency proposal, if you like. And what they want to do is to specify and be quite prescriptive about what local authorities will collect. So, for example, Norwich is in a really, really good place at the moment that we collect almost all, if not all, of the materials that are specified. A lot of councils don't. For example, there's a lot of councils in Norfolk are just beginning to introduce food waste collections. Norwich has been doing that since 2010, I think it is. We collect textiles, we collect electrical equipment, we collect garden waste, we collect yogurt tubs and pots and trays and all the rest of it. We provide a really, really good range of collection services, but not all local authorities do. And that's something that the government want to start prescribing and dictating. And I think that is a good thing in terms of the waste industry across the country, but it's going to cause some difficulties for local authorities that aren't in such a good place. So that's the background, if you like. And in terms of implementation, so the Environment Act came out in 2021, and it's causing no end of bother, as you know, with the, I say no end of bother, it's causing a lot of challenges, as you know, in other parts of the council services, like the biodiversity net gain. And there is a specific part of the Act that relates to waste, and we've talked about that in the last slide. In terms of the extended producer responsibility scheme, what will happen is that, as I said, the producers will pay in to a national scheme, an overarching scheme, and that has been set up to cover the costs incurred by all councils for collecting and recycling packaging waste, apart from drinks containers. It's a massive undertaking. The UK government are currently doing a fact-finding exercise just now. They haven't identified precisely the levy that the producers will pay. So there's still a lot of work to be done, which is concerning given the timescales that we're looking at. 2024 is mentioned there. The first payments are due to councils in October 2024. The scheme is going to be set up in February, March 2024. We've not got long. And I think the consensus is within local government and the waste industry that there's going to be more delay. It's already been delayed, and I think we've got to be realistic about politics as well in terms of what could be happening next year. I think there could be further delay until after a general election next year. And as I mentioned, we don't know what the payment is going to be. We don't know. One of the things I talked earlier about the relationship that we have with the County Council, and for members that aren't aware, the County Council pay us for recycling at the moment. So for every tonne of recycling material we collect, the County Council pay us about £64 a tonne. And that's to reflect the fact that landfill is about £100 a tonne. So for every tonne that we divert away from landfill or energy from waste, the County Council pay us a proportion of that, because basically we're saving them money, and it works. It works as far as I'm concerned. It's a highly effective arrangement. But this new scheme, in terms of paying for packaging, has created a lot of uncertainty around that. And that is a concern for all councils, not just us. It's going to affect the County Council as well, and it'll affect councils throughout England. But the die has been cast as far as this is concerned. I think on balance that it's a good thing, because it will reflect the cost of processing and collecting recyclable material or packaging. But it remains to be seen. I think the devil will be in the detail as usual, and it remains to be seen how this is going to be implemented. So that is extended producer responsibility. And for those of you who can see that, this, as you can see, this is a timeline in terms of the implementation, and it just shows how much time it has taken even to get to this stage. So if we look at the resources and waste strategy came out at the end of 2018, there was a first consultation exercise, took place mid-2019. There's been a further consultation exercise which informed the Environment Act. There's been feedback last year. We still haven't received the final feedback on those consultations. DRS is Deposit Return Scheme, and the two things are quite closely linked. We have had some high-level guidance on how this will work. But as I say, in terms of costs and in terms of timing, we just don't know. We've got that line up and down early 2024, but I think the implementation of this is going to be significantly delayed next year, and that has implications for us. I'll come on to that later on, but it has big implications for us potentially in terms of trying to figure out what we're going to do and what our own waste strategy is going to look like. So I talked earlier about consistency as well. There'll be a phased introduction next year, and as I mentioned, these are the materials that will be specified in the legislation. So glass bottles, they aren't going to be part of the deposit return scheme. I think that's quite important to make that differentiation. Paper and card, plastic bottle, you can read that for yourselves. But the bigger issue there for us is that frequencies of collection might be in scope. Now, there was a directive came out a few years ago about councils that weren't on fortnightly collection moving to that, and the UK government were trying to stop that happening. Obviously, there's a wide range of frequencies now being used for residual waste collection, and the concern is that, again, the UK government might be quite prescriptive. From a purely technical point of view, reducing the frequency of residual waste collection is a really, really effective way of increasing recycling, because residents then look at the recycling bins and make better use of them. But locally and politically, I'm well aware of the resistance that may be encountered on that. But I think it needs to be borne in mind that there will, or there may be limits in the future on changing frequencies of the grey bin collection. What they've also looked at as well, we obviously charge for our garden waste collection. There has been discussion around whether the UK government would specify that needs to be free of charge, and that has big implications for councils across the UK as well. I think the likelihood of that happening is decreasing, but it's something we need to keep an eye on as we develop our own strategy. And we talked about the deposit return scheme, so that looks like it's going to come in 2025. It'll be for drinks containers other than glass that are 3 litres or smaller. It looks like the deposit will be 20 pence per container, so if you buy a can of Coke now, I'm not quite sure how much a can of Coke costs, but if you buy a can of Coke for £1, once this scheme is introduced, you will be paying £1.20, and you'll get that 20 pence back when you take the container back to the retailer. The good news for us is that it will reduce the amount of litter that we collect, but it is going to have an impact, as will the packaging legislation, on how much it costs us to recycle the blue bin material, because a lot of the more aluminium is about £900 a tonne, plastic's probably £200 or £300 a tonne. They're really, really high value commodities, and we get the benefit of that in terms of our costs when we deliver it to News. That's all factored into the amount that we pay, and if we start to take out those high value materials, it might cost us, or will cost us more to get that material processed. There is a balance there in that we will be delivering less, so the tonnage will go down, but so will the value, and we're working on what that's going to look like in terms of financial model. So we're not directly involved in this, other than there's talk about what they call reverse vending machines. So I know Tesco used to do where you would take your containers back and you put it in and get club card points, and there'll be a similar idea with this. So there'll be a little barcode or QR code on your drinks container, and you'll put that into a machine, and then you get your money back, or you get a voucher or whatever. And they're looking at these machines will have permitted development rights. So if a supermarkets want to put one of these machines in their car park, the planning system will be much more relaxed around that kind of thing. So again, just looking at the consistency and the whole package actually there. Again, we've got this timeline. A lot of the implementation there is going to be we're looking at early 2024. This is the guidance that DEFRA are putting out just now, but because of these complexities that we're talking about, I mentioned earlier about the payments that we get from the county council in terms of the recycling credits. There's 101 different arrangements across the country. So in some areas, the county council pay for the recycling schemes directly. They don't. It's not a financial consideration there. They'll take that on behalf of the second tier or two second tier authorities. Some county councils don't pay recycling credits at all. There's a whole mishmash there, and I think it would appear that DEFRA have underestimated the scale of the task that they have. So it's a moving picture. However, if we move on to the next slide, it doesn't stop us from moving forward. Where are we starting from in terms of our waste strategy? I think it's a good place. We had an existing waste strategy that took us up to 2020, and as I mentioned earlier, we had a class-leading range of services. One of I would say the best range of services in the country. the period that covered that strategy, we increased the recycling rate through significant investment and behaviour change from 15% to just under 40%. And we were able to reduce the overall waste that we collected by 20%, and that was against that 2013 baseline. So there were big successes there. I think one of the bigger challenges that we had, particularly in that period, was when COVID hit, and people's behaviour changed quite significantly. And it's been a challenge for us to get back on top of it. But I'll share some benchmarking information with you in a minute. But what we can say is that 40%, we're probably sitting about 39% just now, that has been replicated across all of Norfolk's councils. Not so much the figures, but the behaviour and the performance. So everybody has been sitting at the same recycling rate for probably the last 4 or 5 years. And it's going to take a significant change like this that we've talked about with the legislation that's going to give us that step change that we're looking for. What I've not talked about either, in terms of the good place we're starting from, we have now got our foundations in place. So we've got a new collection contract with DIFA that allows a great deal of flexibility to make the big changes that we want to do. We've got a joint venture, for those of you who don't know, we have a joint venture with the other Norfolk district councils and the county council with News that processes all our blue bin material, and we're locked into that for the next 3 years. We've got a financially and environmentally sustainable model in that, and we've also got a new garden waste contract with TMA. And this has all been market tested, it's been subject to commercial review, and we're really, really confident that we've got a good deal there. The DIFA contract's in place till 2031, so we've got that financial sustainability and certainty there as well. The second last bullet point there is about our recycling rates. So I did a bit of research, and in terms of performance, we're in the third quartile, so that means we're in the bottom half at the moment. But there are an unbelievable number of councils sitting around about 40%. So we do have some top performing councils sitting about 60%, and then there's maybe 10 of them out of 333, and then we've got a group sitting between 50 and 60, and then there's most councils are sitting around about 40%. But the good news for that as well, in terms of the actual waste that we collect, residual waste that should be, we're in the upper quartile there, so we're 41st. So we actually send less waste to landfill in Norwich than most other councils in England. So I think the main point of me being here was to outline where we go next, and the implications for the council and our environmental strategy. What I can say is that we are about to start work on the new strategy within the next couple of weeks, and we need to take into account everything that I've just discussed. So one of the reasons it's taken so long to do this is there's just been this lack of certainty, but we can't wait forever for an announcement from the UK government and what they want to do. We need to act now. So we're starting that work on the new strategy, as I say, in the next couple of weeks. We need, as well as an environmental model, it needs to work financially as well. So we need to develop a model that will take into account all the payments and expenditure I've mentioned in that bullet point, the third bullet point there. And in the middle of all that, I've changed the structure. For those of you who don't know, I'm restructuring environment services, and probably the biggest priority that we've got is to develop and deliver this new waste strategy. The other thing I should note as well is that we're looking to implement this middle of next year, so we want to have the draft strategy ready for, the draft will be ready for the end of this year. We'll obviously subject to consultation and refinement, but what we want to be doing is have an implementation by the third quarter of next year. So the top priority for me and my team over the next 12 months we'll be delivering that strategy. And the one thing I didn't mention up till now is that we renegotiated the new the new contract with BIFA last year, and one of the things we've as a council have committed to is to invest in £3.5 million in a new low carbon fleet for BIFA. Now it's not a zero carbon fleet. We looked at that and there are a number of challenges to deliver that by 2027. It doesn't mean to say we can't do it after that, but we've committed to purchasing a new low carbon fleet for BIFA in 2027. So there's lots of stuff that's happened, there's lots of things that are about to happen, and as I say, the target for implementation on that is the middle of next year. I'd be more than happy to come back to the next panel to provide an update on that and where we've got to. And I think that's the last slide. Yeah, if it's okay with you, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. That was a really clear and useful overview of what's going on nationally and how that might impact us, and as you say, the next steps, which are going to be important. So yeah, I'll open it up to questions. So Councillor Champion, Councillor Osborne.
Just for clarity, you said, I might have misheard you, but you said we weren't doing any landfill in Norfolk?
Correct. So the contracts that are in place are established by the County Council. So they're responsible for disposal. We deliver it, we collect it and deliver it, and the County Council have stopped using landfill for domestic waste disposal. Yeah, it's all, well, so it's energy from waste plants, yeah.
So just for clarity, that landfill is being, we're sending somewhere else?
No. All our waste is now going to energy from waste plants, so we aren't sending any material.
So we're burning it?
Well, I would say energy from waste, you might say permanent, I would say energy from waste, yeah.
But for clarity, we are burning our waste?
We aren't. No, that is a County Council
That's
function.
a County Council?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's their responsibility as well. We don't have any say in that. That's their legal responsibility to dispose of the waste that we collect.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's okay.
Thank you.
Can I just jump in there and ask, does it go down to supper?
I'm not quite sure. I can find out.
You don't know?
No, because it's not our. It's not our responsibility.
I thought you would have known.
No. I can check with it. My guess is
interesting to know the distance it travels.
there will be a number of places that it goes to. Yeah. So I will double check.
I think it'd be interesting to know.
Councillor Osborne.
I think County Council has a contract with for it to go to Bedfordshire. It's where it goes for burning.
Yeah. Well, but I will double check that. Yeah.
Is it possible to find out the carbon emissions of the transportation of waste to Bedfordshire as well?
Can I say something on that?
Yeah.
We're doing a lot of work to review our Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions and to understand, according to this international standard for the greenhouse gas protocol, where our operational emissions boundary is. And we've particularly engaged a brilliant little consultancy company called Small World Consulting to look at our emissions from waste. And in any review of our activity, Andy's absolutely right that the collection and transportation of waste is within our boundaries. And it's within the county's organisational boundary, emissions reporting boundary, to further onward transport that waste, and the incineration that happens around that is firmly held.
Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Oliver.
Thanks. So this is a slightly naive question, but Andy's mentioned that we all think it's pretty good if we're recycling as much as possible. I just think we shouldn't be having that much waste in the first place. So I guess the question is we've got a recycling rate increase by 15%, but I'd be interested to know what the amount of that actually is. That's a recycling rate increase on a certain amount of waste that's being produced in the first place. You mentioned the circular economy stuff, but you haven't really given any detail on what's being done to reduce waste in the first place.
Okay, I'll answer your first part of your question if that's okay. So the amount of tonnage that we produced, as I say, is reduced. So that recycling rate is a bigger chunk of a smaller bin, if you like. That's it. In terms of a waste reduction and minimisation, that's something that we've not looked at, if I'm perfectly candid. We haven't looked at that yet. We're trying to get our collection systems sorted first, because that's if you like, it's lower hanging fruit. And the bigger challenges, because it's a big, as candid as it can be, the bigger challenges in terms of behaviour change and reducing consumption. That is like the, that's a nirvana that we want to get to. But at the moment, we need to get our collection systems in place because we've got this big challenge coming with the legislation that's been introduced in the next year to 18 months.
Yeah, personally, I don't know what other members think, but I think that has to be an aim to reduce the amount of waste in the first place. And it might be something that Steve recommends.
I would agree. Well, from a professional point of view, I would agree 100% with that. I think we just need to have, sort of prioritised actions. Yeah.
Is it following on from the same point? Because we've got a bit of a queue.
Yeah, I've got more questions about the sort of data on the recycling. Shall I come back to that?
I'll come back round to you if that's all right. Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Ethan. Can I ask about the reverse vending machine possibilities? Because when I first heard about them, I thought they sounded really exciting, innovative, etc. And I thought, people quite often think back some years ago, don't they, when they used to take their glass bottles back, get some deposit back. But are we convinced that it will increase the rates of recycling? And also, do we know what will happen to the materials that are collected? Because I was thinking, if you've got like those little fizzy drink bottles, it wouldn't take very many of them for the machine to be quite full. It looks like they'd be possibly quite bulky unless they're crushing them, and then in which case, why are we not just using the facilities that we already have, i.e. the MRF to process them? It doesn't really sound like a win for us.
Yeah, you're right. In terms of benefit to the council, there is, it's minimal, if you like. We will get a benefit in terms of reductions in litter and reductions in overall volumes, and it might allow us to change our collection systems. In terms of reverse vending machine, the benefit there is the materials that you're collecting are going to be a lot cleaner than they would have been if they've been in a blue bin, unless people are washing them, and then they're going to the materials recovery facility, the MRF, and then they're getting mixed in with all the other stuff. So the benefit of the reverse vending machines, they don't have to be, it could be that in some of the retail premises you just hand over your container and they're put in a bag and put in the back shop. But the benefit of that scheme is that it's clean material that you're taking to processors, and that's where they're hoping to stimulate the circular economy. It makes it a lot easier to recycle. I'll give you an example. The capacity for plastics reprocessed in this country is really, really poor, and this is one of the ways that they can stimulate that and try and keep as much material as possible in the UK for reprocessing and stimulating that part of the economy. So the benefit of the reverse vending machines is that they're accessible for residents. They produce clean material, which is then more valuable and is easier to recycle. We'll get the benefit of less litter because people won't want to basically throwing away 20 pence a time, and also we'll have less material to recycle.
Yeah.
Well, that is a bit more reassuring than I envisioned. But will we still be able to process the plastic bottles and things, etc., with the blue bins?
So, yeah, some we're looking at. It's been discussed quite a bit about if we're collecting that material in a grey bin, for talk's sake, or through litter collections, will we be able to claim the 20 pence deposit? And the answer isn't clear at the moment. We're working on that through the Waste Partnership.
Councillor Lubbock next.
Yes, thank you, Andy, for that run through of the strategy. I think it's a very complex and challenging situation that we're going to be in for the next few years. We used to have a very good team of communicators that would sort of nudge the public to do various things. And but I don't suppose we've got them anymore. But some years ago, they would sort of put information out to sort of encourage people to reduce waste, and you know, we'd have a week or two where youngsters sort of would be given stars at school or something like that to sort of improve the recycling rates or whatever. But I don't suppose we're at that stage really.
No, but as I say, that's something I've identified in the new structure, that we need to have dedicated staff that are going to implement this, because the design of the service is relatively straightforward. Once we have agreed what we want to do, the implementation is going to be the really big challenge, and getting residents to buy in to this and communicating what it is we're trying to do.
Because they always revert back to what they used to do or something like that.
Yeah.
And they need to be told, you know, that at the end of the day it is reduce the amount, and that would be really helpful to the planet.
So I think there's going to be a mixed approach to that in terms of using existing staff that we've got, and if we need to bring in specialist resource for that implementation piece, then that's something we need to do as well.
So you feel that we're in a good place with our contractors, BIFA, and you said you renegotiated the contract last year.
Okay.
What happened in May this year to change the way that they collect waste?
There was a few issues in May. One of them surrounded the garden waste calendars. If it's okay to talk about garden waste calendars, there was a significant error between BIFA and the printers, and that the calendars that were supplied were basically for the wrong addresses. We initially thought that was for a small proportion of the customers. It turns out it was for everyone. And so there was a lot of work we had to put in there to try and roll back from that situation and make sure that residents had the right information for garden waste. We also had 3 or 4 public holidays happening on consecutive weekends, and that caused a lot of disruption, particularly with the coronation weekend, because that was on a Saturday. Normally that's our fallback position, and we didn't want to provide a collection service on coronation day, so there was a combination of bringing stuff forward and pushing stuff back, and that caused a lot of disruption.
I accept that all that. It wasn't what I was getting at. In May, BIFA contractors decided not to climb any stairs to take waste away.
I wasn't aware of that. I do know that
I have a blind lady in mind.
Is it okay if we can talk about that tomorrow? Yeah, okay. But I'm not aware of any sort of service disruption on that basis.
Oh, it wasn't disruption. It was just they refused to climb any stairs, and so a blind lady in an upstairs flat now has to take her rubbish down, whereas before they came and collected it. But she's being told that it is because the risks involved for the contractors.
Between just now and tomorrow, I'll find out what's been happening there, if that's okay.
Yeah. I just thought it was across the city, and it was known about.
No.
Because I've had lots of toing and froing with the Carl Pike about it. I just wondered why they had taken that step. But nobody else was aware of it. No.
I'll check that out by our meeting tomorrow, if that's okay.
Thank you. Before I'll bring Councillor Steetley in because he's not asked a question, then I'll come back to you. Councillor Steetley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think part of my question has been answered. I was going to ask about to remind me what we receive by tonne for the materials. You just run through that again.
So, in terms of recycling credits, we get about £64 a tonne from the county.
And for the specific materials and the
aluminium? The way that works, what we've agreed with News, so we renegotiated the contract with News in November 2021, and we pay a different gate fee every month depending on the commodity market for each material. So I can give you roughly how much, or a yearly average. I've not got the information just now, but I can provide you with a yearly average of of that basket, we call it a basket of goods. So let's just say this month we're paying £20 a tonne to deliver material to use, and that'll be made up of their costs for running the facility and the income they get for each commodity that we're delivering. So as I say, aluminium could be £900 a tonne this month, paper and card we'll probably pay to dispose of, plastics might be £200 a tonne. So they do a big calculation and say, right, based on the material you've delivered to us for this month, with these commodity prices on the global market, this is how much you should be paying. But I can give you a sample spreadsheet on that, if that would help you.
Okay, well, it may not be necessary. I was just doing a quick calculation to see how it compares, and I was looking up the weight of a typical 330 ml Coke can that says 15 grams. I calculate that to be £1,333 per tonne. So there's an opportunity there for somebody.
We can, and it's a totally, just to reassure members, it's a totally open book process. So if they said we've charged, we base these rates on £900 a tonne, we can check. There's a couple of open source sources of data that we can check to say, right, they're saying £900 a tonne. How much actually was it? And we're really very, very highly confident that we're being charged a fair rate for that. We've benchmarked it as well. There's a lot of market testing on before we signed up to this contract. We think it's a really, really good deal, which is obviously why we signed up to it. But I can give you an example of how that is calculated, if that would help.
Okay, thank you. If I may, Chair, there's another question, but I'm happy to wait until somebody else agrees.
I'll come to Councillor Padder, who's not asked one, and then I'll cycle round again, if that's all right.
Sorry, thank you. I have a question related to one of your slides. So is there any?
Yeah, we can go back. If you tell me which one.
So
right?
the second bullet from bottom.
Oh,
right?
so the second bullet.
Yeah, from the bottom.
The second from the bottom.
So
yeah.
in
Sorry.
your assessment of that, did you have a look at what the top performing councils are doing in terms of their activities?
I know from some of them anyway that they're providing the service that we used to provide, which was different containers for different commodities. So my understanding is that with the box system here, and there'll be a box for cans and bottles, and there'll be a box for cardboard and paper. Is that right? Maybe about 15 years ago. I'm getting blank.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that the higher performing councils predominantly operate that kind of system. They also will have either 3-weekly or 4-weekly residual waste collections, and those are certainly as I said earlier, reducing the frequency of the grey bin collections is a really effective way of increasing recycling, because people need to use their other containers. How politically acceptable that is remains to be seen in Norwich, and it's not something I'm advocating, but the higher performing councils will have a mixture of 3 and 4 weekly collections and what we call source separated, which is basically either in boxes or bins for different types of materials.
Councillor Osborne?
Thank you. I've got a few questions on the data, if that's okay. So the recycling rate is increased. Do you know what the contamination rate is?
It can vary, yeah. Depending on where we are collecting from, it can be anything between 10 and 20%. Yeah.
Because I guess that's the other concern that I have about saying increasing recycling rate is if you increase recycling, but people are putting a lot of stuff in, it invalidates the whole thing.
Yeah.
And related to that, where the aim to have all plastic packaging to be recyclable by 2025, is that going to be recyclable in blue bins?
Yes.
Or is it
That's
you have to take it?
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
So I'm not being funny with that. There'd be no point otherwise. Yeah. And that's why that ties in with the consistency thing that I was talking about, where they want to be able to recycle tubs, pots, trays, films, all the rest of it. Yeah.
Another question: does fly tipping count towards residual waste?
Yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So again, we went through the process. And I think it was about, if I remember rightly, about 200 tonnes of materials collected as fly tipping a year.
And how much does that compare to the other residual waste?
I need to. Well, I can tell you the total figure is 67,000 tonnes. So yeah. So you're probably yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of the contamination rate, I'll just go back to that. Is there plans to try and reduce that as well?
Yeah. So the most effective way to do that is through engagement. Just as I was mentioning, the council, I love it a minute ago. It needs to be targeted intervention there, either by ourselves, with the environment services in partnership, because a lot of the contamination is coming from social housing. I think there's quite a clear link there. So there has to be a sort of partnership approach between environment services and social housing providers, including ourselves. Yeah.
So another reason to review the common logins.
Sorry?
Another reason to review the common logins.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Councillor Stutley?
Thank you. I was going to ask about contamination rates and soft plastics, so I think that virtually answered now. Thank you.
Are there any last questions or points before I'm aware we've got another item on the agenda? Councillor Osborne.
Can we make a recommendation that Cabinet looks at waste reduction as well as a goal?
I'll let you go first.
Do any other members have any comments either way on that one? Councillor Padder?
Yes, a quick one from me actually. I think one of the solutions to answering or allaying some of the questions could be by developing some kind of an evaluation framework or to align what activities you're undertaking and how to the goals of what you're trying to achieve. So it's kind of a suggestion.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, Councillor Stutley.
Thank you. I would like to see some specific work on how we may quickly reduce contamination rates, especially where we've got hotspots. So I'd like to make that a recommendation if you can come up with some wording. And also to bring forward collection of soft plastics, if at all possible, because it's something that comes up on the doorsteps quite often for us, especially those that can't transport to the supermarkets that currently collect them. It's the same issue as with fly tipping. If you don't have transport, if you don't have the means to transport items, and it's perhaps an opportunity for us to work with partners.
Okay, so we've got the waste reduction, a recommendation around waste reduction, around potential sort of evaluation framework, more work on contamination, and bringing forward soft plastics. Andy, do you have any last sort of points on those to reflect on, or?
That's something, from an operational point of view, that wouldn't present us with any challenges.
Okay, great. And do we need to look more closely at the wording, or have you got the essence of that discussion?
Sorry, is there a report going to Cabinet? Sorry, I don't understand.
Or I presume
this is a recommendation to Andy. Sorry, I don't know quite where this is going.
I'm presuming it's basically noting it for viewing by relevant Cabinet member. Is that, I think, within the scope of this panel?
Presumably, SEEP makes recommendations to Cabinet, so a recommendation to Cabinet to bring forward a waste reduction strategy, or including the.
I think sorry, from an officer point of view, it would be more effective to make that a priority within the waste strategy, if that helps. Yeah.
Okay. With thanks to providing Councillor Padder's very good point about evaluation and goals within that.
Just have a very quick one. I am concerned that there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't want to keep on offering suggestions if it's going to just add more to a very busy portfolio. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but in terms of evaluation, I think that's absolutely fundamentals.
Okay.
And that's not. We will have the data. We've got loads of data on this, so we should be able to map the effect of the changes after we've made them. If that's what you're asking about.
Okay, so are we content that they're noted in the minutes and it will be brought to the attention of Cabinet, given that? Okay, in which case, shall we move on to the next item? And thank you very much, Andy, for your time and for answering all those questions.
You're very welcome. Thanks for your time, Chair. Thank you, members.
So, emissions reporting, am I handing over to Ben?
Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Hi everyone. So it's a relatively short report, so I think we'll just run through the key details fairly quickly and then open it up to questions. That's probably easiest. So this all stems from a thing called NI 185, National Energy 185, which was at one point a statutory obligation of local authorities to report on their emissions each year. That was only a thing for about 5 years, stopped in 2013, but pretty much ever since, we and most other councils have continued doing it anyway, which makes sense. So that's a fairly robust way of measuring emissions. That includes all of our Scope 1 emissions, all of our Scope 2 emissions, and a subset of our Scope 3 emissions. That's always been the case. And we've kind of followed the previous guidance on why that is. So it doesn't include all of our Scope 3 emissions, but most of our major contracts it does. So for example, bippers, collection, fuel use are included in that. That's one of the key ones. So middle of last year, we procured a consultancy to measure our emissions for the 21-22 financial year, so essentially kind of 2 years ago now, and also have a look at all the previous ones we've done, a kind of audit. So that was a really thorough exercise looking at that 1 year to get the new data and how we've done previously, just to make sure that we were on top of things. So I'll start with the audit. That is, like I say, fairly thorough. It went back to 2012. We started in 2007. The reason it stopped at 2012 was just because there wasn't available data back further than that. So overall, they found that the methodology was fairly good, but they did find a few sort of inconsistencies. They were relatively small and linked to things like conversion factors or just putting things in the wrong scopes, which in terms of the final figure doesn't make a huge amount of difference. But then doing that work, sort of putting a proper process in place and doing it for the 21-22 year means that we now have this very robust methodology framework to do it going forward, to understand it better going forwards. So that's that on the audit. In terms of our emissions for the 21-22 financial year, they were 3.6 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent, so that includes carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, but it sort of measures CO2 equivalent to sort of reflective of the warming potential of different greenhouse gases. So that equates to a 6.8% reduction on the previous year's figure, 2021, which then translates to a 66% reduction from 2007 baseline. Again, bearing in mind that that baseline wasn't audited because the data doesn't go back that far. So there's that, and then there's a table in the report which breaks down our emissions by scope and how they kind of feed into different things. I won't go through the numbers for itself if you want to look at it in more detail. So since the 2007 baseline year, that actually works out as a 7% decrease per year over that period. I mean, it jumps up and down massively, but that's the average. that reduction in that year was predominantly down to three things. First was energy saving project, which is the obvious one. Second was building rationalisation, and third was contractor fuel use. So point 16 we touched upon, we saw a 42% reduction in emissions from contractor fuel use, which is pretty big. I think reflects a kind of wider shift to either increased efficiency or a lot of contractors have shifted to electric vehicles. NTSL, for example, have quite a big electric fleet. So I'll touch upon building rationalisation. That refers, so in our scope 1 and 2 emissions, that's gas and electricity use essentially, and that includes pretty much all of our council buildings. Where it gets a little bit complicated is what's classed as ours and what isn't. So for example, buildings that we lease out, technically, according to the guidance, aren't included in our emissions because they're kind of not used for our operations. So what that refers to is where we did have a building that we used or was attributed to us, but we've since leased it out, so no longer counts towards our emissions, basically. And then there's also a list of energy saving projects, again, the obvious sources of emissions reductions. And I'll add since then, we've had things like the heat pump and simple go operational, so that should be reflected in the next couple of years as well. As I touched upon, the NI 185 reporting, so moving on to implications and next steps, the NI 185 reporting doesn't include all of our scope 3. Like I say, it includes I think we call them platinum contracts, is that right? So it's the main emission sources, but not everything. The work with Small World Consultant who did the audit has also included an exercise to fully establish our whole scope of scope 3 emissions. We've only just received that work in the last couple of weeks, so we're now doing a bit of work to understand it ourselves basically before we then publish and make plans according to that. But just to reference that is something that we're aware of and on top of, I'd like to think. And then it's this year, this understanding of our emissions, which will now inform our carbon management plan that we're now working on going forwards. So part of the audit and getting someone else to do this was to know that what we're looking at is a very accurate baseline of what we need to work on to get to net zero by 2030. So that's going to inform that work going forwards. That's pretty much the key details very quickly.
Thank you very much. That was a good recap. Got Councillor Osborne, then Councillor Champion.
Thank you, and congratulations on this as well. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry if this has been answered already in previous seats, but I think Council's operating emissions are about 2% of the area-wide emissions, 1 to 2%. So that includes Scope 3, or will Scope 3 be a larger proportion of that?
So is that 2% you're referring to with our whole?
Yeah.
I think it depends how that was worked out. I don't know the method that would have been. I know for sure, it's relatively obvious that our whole Scope 3 emissions would be larger than just the subset we've got here. In terms of that 2%, I didn't know we can
That's good. Yeah, I guess the reason I asked that is to see how this fits into the area-wide emissions that are in for 2045, by 2045, by 100. So I guess, yeah, looking at how that Scope 3 reduction can help reduce area-wide emissions. Although I also expect some of that Scope 3 will not be within Norwich, presumably.
So the current measurement of what are known as territorial emissions are only Scope 1 and 2. So we feel that we're really leading by arriving at a detailed understanding of our Scope 3 emissions, which aren't measured currently in the area providers, I said. And you're right, some of them will be in territory and some of them will be out of territory. And the purpose of the exercise is to look at where our emissions are coming from in terms of spend category, but also geographically, and so we can make plans to reduce those wider emission sets from, for example, reducing transport from out of territory to in territory. So it's really informing kind of longer term thinking.
I do have other questions, but
I'll go around. Councillor Champion.
Thank you for that report. I was just brought to mind Councillor Carlo, who's no longer on the committee, obviously, but she highlighted in a previous meeting, in our last meeting, that we needed an 8% reduction year on year in order to achieve the 84% targets by 2040. How does it feel like we're hitting 8%, and if we're doing a low-hanging fruit at the moment, that doesn't bear well for the future? What would your response to that be?
So just to be clear, so I think we're talking about council emissions here. Net zero target is 2030.
Okay, sorry.
No, just to clarify that we're not talking about a citywide target, which commitments have also been made in the 2040 city vision. But so we're talking about our own corporate emissions. And we have got a corporate plan commitment to reduce by 3% a year, and actually we are exceeding that. But Councillor Carlo's maths is correct, that if we are to hit our net zero 2030, we need to increase our year-on-year commitments and the delivery of those, and we're currently reviewing those, and we'll be publishing for consultation our new targets, our new approaches in the coming months. November, I think.
Thank you.
Any further questions before I come back to Councillor Osborne? No, Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, I mean, I always want to talk about territorial emissions rather than just the council emissions, but I will focus on this here, because that's what the report is about. Paragraph 14, sorry, this might be a play question. Paragraph 14, where it talks about a reduction in emission energy savings projects through lighting upgrades. Forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I thought that it kind of eliminated any emissions from electricity by switching to a green tariff. So if we've already eliminated that, how can we reduce carbon more from switching to a green energy efficiency, if that makes sense?
I mean, yeah, that is correct, essentially. So, as you say, the lighting ones are reducing electricity. So, in terms of our own emissions for this period, that they won't be impacting our organisational emissions, but ultimately it's still a sort of energy reduction. So, in terms of the grid as a whole, it's still a reduction of load, but it makes a difference, even though that isn't necessarily reflected on our numbers. That makes sense?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the table slightly higher up on that page where it says basically electricity in buildings, 0.
What you're seeing there is a summary. When we publish the carbon footprint report, you'll see a more detailed analysis. And the way NI 185 and the new standard that we're moving to, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, requires us to report is it requires us to report electricity before and after the use of green electricity. So we are showing here that actually we're not just buying green electricity. Ben alludes to the important fact that, although the generation of renewable energy in the UK is a fantastic success story, we still need to use it as see it as a precious resource. So when you see our carbon footprint report, it will show the electricity that we consume and then how much of that is pure green.
So it's essentially it's a way of measuring reduction in demand at the same time as
There is a table at the end just to add, I think there is, which has our net and gross electricity demand, so you can kind of see throughout the years the reduction in general electricity use, and then that netted off because of the green tariff, like you said.
Is it directly related? If not, I can see Councillor Stutley, so I'll come back.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a question about vehicles. But first, I'd just like to comment and say thank you for the report, and I welcome the new calculations that we're making here. I think it probably makes our job tougher to reach those targets, but it does so in the right way because it's important to reach those targets properly and fully. Regarding the contractors' vehicles, there's a big difference between the emissions from our direct fleet vehicles and those of contractors. So can you give me some examples? I guess Biffa's included and there may be other contractors. Can you give me some examples of other contractors that are included in those, the types of vehicles that they use, and whether there are any opportunities to reduce those emissions? Because there looks like there could be some low-hanging fruit there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, like you say, the contractors' fuel use and emissions from that far outweighs our own fleet. So the main ones in that, from memory, are Biffa, I think by a long way. Imagine how much they're driving around and the size of the lorries they use. NCSL are on there and up there, and Gasway as well. You have to take a fair bit of work for us. So there's a fair bit we can do in terms of influencing, I suppose, contracts as well, as Andy alluded to. Biffa looking to transition their fleet, NCSL obviously can do a fair bit, and they do have, I think, from just personal observation, quite a significant electric fleet. So there is quite a bit we can do with NCSL directly, I think, and then indirectly, just I think the influence is more in the contracts rather than
Okay, so with Biffa, with their plans to improve the emissions of their fleet, this figure sounds like it's going to reduce significantly in the short term. Anyway, which is good news. Thank you.
Any further questions from people who haven't asked one on this item? If not, Councillor Osborne.
Small one consulting looking at council housing as well. Yeah. So will that won't form part of any scope 1, 2 or 3, it will be a separate part of the HRA. When will we see that report?
I think the HRA business plan cabinet paper of December 23 set out an expectation that we would be bringing plans at least to spend £52 million on energy efficiency in our social housing stock in April of next year. So the work that Small World Consulting has done on the approach and cost of that will inform that plan.
And when it gets to April next year, so there's the 52 million over 5 years. Obviously April next year will be 1 year, more than a year into that, year and a half essentially into that. So this is maybe sort of straying slightly into.
I think it is. Sorry,
yeah.
I'm not going to say that one.
Yes. So, well,
but yeah, it's to me it's a much bigger item in a way than this. In terms of emissions, it's got to be a bigger thing, surely.
I think what is within the scope of this committee is we've taken action to understand the extent of our scope 3 emissions, and we'll be bringing plans to tackle them, of which housing is part of that.
So it is part of scope 3?
They are our scope 3 emissions.
Okay.
yeah, no one else is indicating, so go for it.
I know the County Council have been looking at their scope 3 emissions as well. Have you linked up with them on this?
Not specifically on scope 3, but they consulted with us prior to the publication of their climate strategy. But there were regular meetings both in the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership and specific officers of county around the development, but scope 3 is we're in early stages of that.
So I wonder if there's any overlap in terms of suppliers.
I think it's useful to know. I'll make sure I put that on their agenda.
Okay, any other last questions, comments before we go back to Councillor Osborne? Go on.
You mentioned that the County Council climate change strategy, one of the points in that is to develop a high-level financing strategy essentially for their area-wide emissions. Is there any scope to essentially either piggyback on some of that in terms of getting financing in to for reducing scope 3 emissions particularly?
So the work of the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership has 3 activity areas: retrofitting, transport and community energy. And there's an active collaboration going on around finance and shared resources and shared approaches, so specifically with retrofitting.
I've got more questions, but
if they're directly relevant to this item and you want to get last 1 or 2 out, go for it. But otherwise, I'll did you indicate, Councillor Sue? Oh no, you were just. Otherwise, I'll bring it to a close.
Yeah, when I was last on seat, we were told that we might have to rely on offsets for the last bit of the really hard to decarbonise bit of our own estate. Is that still the plan? Do you think we get to 0 by 2030? Sorry.
We are crunching the numbers. I think through avoidance and reduction, heat pumps, that kind of thing, the cost is likely to be unaffordable by 2030 of doing all of that work to all of our buildings and operations, scope and we're still churning the numbers and looking at how we might be able to finance that. My gut feeling is it's unlikely. And so the recommendations that we're working up and also further discussion are around very specific types of offsetting, which are known as removal approaches, which physically remove carbon from the atmosphere. So I'm comfortable with those as a viable and genuine approach to carbon reduction, and the typical means of doing that is by planting trees, which improves biodiversity if it's done properly, access to nature, etc. So both of those are in the frame at the moment, but until we finalise the draft strategy, we can't finish still.
Any last points from anyone? Councillor Padder?
Just a quick
No,
one.
it's fine.
I wanted to say that I recognise that what you're embarking on is not an easy job, and hat off to you. So I think it is incredible and good to have. I'm looking forward to seeing the report.
Very much.
Yeah, in which case we'll bring it to a close. But yeah, thank you, and agree with Councillor Padder. And I think these results, and as the report notes, especially given this was coming out of COVID, where there are other factors where actually we would have expected some emissions to go up. I think this is it's clearly good progress with more work to come to do better in the future. So thank you very much for answering all the questions. I think that's it. So I'll bring the meeting to a close.